Have you ever had the feeling that you're doing everything right with your money, and yet nothing changes? Working harder, saving, cutting expenses, saying no to small desires, giving up simple pleasures, and still looking at your account and feeling that the effort brought no relief whatsoever, as if all the sacrifice was too silent to generate any real impact. If this feeling has ever crossed your mind, stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. This is undoubtedly one of the most discouraging phases of financial life, a phase where you start to wonder if it's really worth continuing. You strive, try to be responsible, make decisions that most people avoid, but the money doesn't seem to respond. It doesn't grow. It doesn't provide security. It doesn't bring peace of mind. On the contrary, sometimes it even seems that the more you try to control it, the further away the result becomes. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever felt this mixture of frustration and doubt, as if you were rowing against an invisible current? And that's exactly where many people misinterpret this phase. Most believe that this discouragement is a sign of personal failure, that perhaps they are doing something wrong, that they weren't born to build wealth, that this doesn't work for those who earn little or started too late. But the truth is different, and almost no one tells you. This frustration is not your fault. It's an invisible stage of the process, a stage that doesn't appear in motivational videos, isn't explained in quick conversations, and is almost never said honestly. In the early stages of building wealth, money doesn't bring emotional comfort. It demands discipline without immediate reward. You cut expenses, but you don't feel freedom. You save, but you don't feel secure. You work harder, but you don't feel progress. And this creates a dangerous internal conflict, the feeling that all the effort is useless. It's at this point that silent thoughts arise, such as, maybe I'm overdoing it, maybe I deserve to enjoy life more now, or even, I'll start again later. And let me ask you something important. Have you ever thought about giving up precisely because it seemed like continuing didn't make sense? This phase tests your financial mindset much more than your income. It confronts you with the discomfort of doing the right thing without applause, validation, or visible results. It's as if the game hasn't truly begun yet, even though you're already exhausted. And the most dangerous thing is that, on the outside, everything seems normal. You pay your bills, follow your routine, keep life going. But inside, doubt grows. Is all this effort really worth it? What almost no one tells you is that this feeling of stagnation doesn't arise before progress. It arises immediately before a level change. It's a silent shock, an emotional barrier that separates those who stop from those who continue. And understanding this completely changes how you perceive discouragement, effort, and the very meaning of saving money at the beginning of the journey. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a clear reason why this phase is so difficult, and it changes everything when it finally makes sense. And perhaps the hardest part of this phase is precisely going through it alone, thinking that only you feel this weight, this silent doubt, this exhaustion that doesn't show up on your bank statement. Therefore, while you listen to all this, it's worth honestly asking yourself, where are you on this journey now? Are you still trying to understand why the effort doesn't bring relief? Or are you already feeling that something needs to change within you before it changes in the numbers? If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you most so far, or even the frustration you've been silently carrying. Sometimes, putting it into words changes more than it seems, and it can help other people who are in exactly the same phase as you. And if at any point you thought, that's me, consider liking this video. It's not just a click. It's a way to show that this type of conversation needs to continue, that talking about building wealth, honestly, without easy promises, really matters. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who are experiencing that same initial shock, that same feeling of effort without results. If you feel this content resonates with your reality, subscribe to the channel. Not as someone searching for a magic formula, but as someone who decides to embark on a more conscious journey about money, mindset, and building real wealth. Each subscription strengthens this community and shows me that it's worthwhile to continue bringing this type of reflection, going beyond the obvious, beyond what everyone else repeats. And while you're doing this, remember one thing. This phase isn't here to make you give up, but to test you. And understanding why it exists completely changes how you deal with discouragement, effort, and the very patience that this process demands. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because there's a very specific reason why this stage is so uncomfortable, and almost no one explains it correctly. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a hidden truth about the first steps towards financial success that almost no one honestly explains. At the beginning of the journey, money doesn't work for you. It doesn't multiply, it doesn't accelerate, it doesn't create a visible impact. It simply obeys. It obeys your decisions, your limits, your discipline, and this completely changes how this phase is felt. People grow up hearing that saving money is the secret, but they are almost never prepared for what really happens when they start doing it in practice. The expectation is of relief, of rapid progress, of some sign that the effort is paying off. But what comes is silence. A financial silence that generates doubt, frustration, and an uncomfortable feeling of being stuck. In this initial stage, there is no perceptible compounding effect. Even if it's technically happening, you don't feel it. The numbers are too small to generate an emotional impact. There is no passive income, no money coming in effortlessly, no "now that's it" feeling. Everything depends exclusively on your active work and conscious decisions. Each saved amount seems insignificant compared to the effort it required. And this creates a powerful internal conflict, because the human mind has been trained to respond to visible rewards. When these don't appear, the brain begins to question the entire process. This is where many give up, not for lack of ability, but for lack of understanding of the inner workings of this phase. What almost no one mentions is that this slowness isn't a sign of error, but of structure. It's like pushing something very heavy at the beginning. You exert force, sweat, get tired, and the object barely moves. The temptation is to believe that it's not worth continuing to push, but the weight doesn't suddenly decrease. What changes is the inertia. There's a point where the effort begins to generate real movement. Before that, everything seems stuck. And this is one of the biggest emotional traps in building wealth, confusing the absence of a perceived progress with the absence of real progress. This phase demands a silent transformation of mindset. You learn to make decisions without applause, to maintain consistency without external motivation, to trust the process even when the impact isn't yet apparent. It's a journey more internal than financial. Money hasn't grown enough yet to make a difference in your life, but you're already changing inside. You're learning to deal with delayed rewards, with strategic patience, with choices that don't bring immediate pleasure, and this prepares the ground for something bigger, even if it seems invisible now. The problem is that, without this understanding, the mind creates dangerous narratives. It starts to call discipline rigidity, consistency excessive sacrifice, and patience a waste of time. And when these ideas mix with the fatigue of daily life, the person abandons the process just before creating the necessary foundation for money to gain its own momentum. Everything seems slow, because there isn't yet enough financial mass to generate impact. But this mass is only built by traversing that uncomfortable stretch, that void between effort and reward. Understanding this completely changes how you interpret this phase. Discouragement ceases to be an enemy and becomes a signal that you are doing something that most people don't do, something that doesn't generate immediate dopamine, something that requires a long-term vision. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there is a specific point where this relationship with money begins to change. And that's exactly where almost everyone abandons the journey without realizing it. Comment below, "That makes sense to me," or "I'm on this journey too." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is exactly where most financial stories end without the person realizing it. There's a very specific emotional trap at this point in the journey, and it has nothing to do with numbers, spreadsheets, or income. It has to do with psychological exhaustion, with that silent feeling of doing everything right and yet not feeling any real change. This stretch of the journey becomes a real zone of giving up. Not because the plan is wrong, but because the mind starts seeking immediate relief to compensate for the accumulated frustration. It is at this moment that small, seemingly harmless decisions arise. The person rewards themselves too soon, telling themselves they deserve a little comfort now. After all, they've already given up so much. You spend again because you also need to live, because nobody can handle so much discipline, because you can't wait that long. And, little by little, what was a one-off adjustment becomes a pattern. The money that should build a foundation starts to alleviate emotions, and when that happens, the journey begins to go in circles. Even with the feeling of movement, the trap becomes even more dangerous because it comes with a very convincing internal narrative. The person begins to conclude that this doesn't work, that saving money doesn't change anything, that building wealth is only for those who earn a lot. This hidden truth gradually forms, without fanfare, until it becomes a solid belief. And beliefs shape decisions. Decisions shape financial destinies. The impact of this doesn't appear in the short term, but defines entire years of repetition. This is precisely where the concept of the shark door comes in, not as something mystical or exaggerated, but as a real psychological landmark. This door represents the boundary between two completely different games. On one side, there's the familiar cycle: win, spend, get frustrated, promise to change, start over. On the other, there's a quieter game, less exciting at the beginning, but infinitely more transformative. Whoever crosses this phase enters a different game. Whoever leaves returns to the cycle. And the most curious thing is that from the outside, almost no one notices when this decision happens. It doesn't come with an announcement, nor a set date. It happens in small, repeated, almost invisible decisions. This phase demands a rare kind of emotional maturity. It requires continuing even without applause, resisting even without visible proof, sustaining a mindset that hasn't yet been rewarded. It's a behind-the-scenes journey, a period where transformation happens first in the way of thinking before it appears in the results. Money doesn't respond yet, but the person begins to change. You start making more conscious decisions, understanding the time lag between cause and effect, accepting that the real impact comes after overcoming discomfort. The problem is that 90% don't make it through, not because they're incapable, but because they confuse this phase with a wrong turn. And when they give up, they carry with them the conviction that they tried everything, when in reality they stopped just before the turning point. This is the most unsettling revelation of this stage. The point where it seems most pointless to continue is usually the closest to the next level change. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a specific moment when the effort finally starts to pay off. And understanding this point completely changes how you approach your own journey. Comment below, "I'm on this journey too," or "That makes sense to me." Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a specific moment when the feeling changes, even without anything extraordinary happening on the outside. It's not a magic number. It's not an exact value. It's not an event that everyone notices at the same time. It's something more subtle. Suddenly, the money starts to retain its impact. It stops slipping away immediately and starts to stay. There isn't much left over, but it remains in a different way. What previously seemed to evaporate now stays long enough to generate an effect. And this detail changes everything inside. At this point in the journey, small decisions begin to produce visible signs. They aren't spectacular turnarounds, but concrete answers. An avoided expense doesn't become frustration. It becomes relief. A conscious choice doesn't seem like a sacrifice. It seems like control. The mind realizes that there is a real link between decision and result. It's as if the system finally begins to respond. Money still doesn't work for you as many promise, but it no longer ignores you. And this change, however small it may seem, has an enormous psychological impact. Discouragement begins to lose its power because confidence takes its place. Not that exaggerated, euphoric confidence, but a calm, built-up confidence. You start to trust the process more than the emotion of the moment. The mindset changes. Decisions become clearer. The noise diminishes. Comparison with others loses relevance. And, without realizing it, you begin to operate on another level. It's not about getting rich. It's about leaving financial survival mode and entering conscious building mode. This is where the shark gate stops being just an idea and becomes a real psychological milestone. You understand that there is a before and an after. Before, everything seemed heavy, slow, discouraging. Afterward, the path remains demanding, but it ceases to be confusing. The journey gains logic. The behind-the-scenes events begin to make sense. You understand that what brought you here is not the same thing that will take you further. And this understanding changes the way you view money, time, and choices. At this stage, the person no longer needs external validation to continue. They don't depend on constant motivation because they see their own progress. The impact isn't just in the numbers, but in the relationship with them. Money ceases to be a constant source of anxiety and becomes a tool under construction. There are still challenges, there are still doubts, but now there is direction. The transformation happens first in the way of thinking, then in the way of acting, and only then in the results. Many people look from the outside and don't understand what has changed, but those who go through it know. They know because they feel it. They know because they no longer react the same way. They know because they realize they've regained clarity. It's a silent but decisive point in the journey. And when you cross that milestone, it becomes clear that returning to the old cycle no longer makes sense. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's something that differentiates those who maintain this new level from those who end up slipping back without realizing it. Comment below. That makes sense to me. Or I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because after all this, there's a silent invitation that almost no one notices when it appears. It's not a comfortable or explicit invitation. It doesn't come with guarantees or easy promises. It emerges as an internal, discreet choice, often made in silence, without witnesses. It's the moment when you need to decide whether you continue to believe that saving money isn't worth it, or whether you accept that the discouragement you feel now might be exactly the sign that the door is near. This choice doesn't happen all at once. It manifests itself in small, everyday decisions, in seemingly harmless thoughts, in justifications that appear logical. It's when you wonder if all this effort really makes sense, if it wouldn't be easier to relax a little, return to the known pattern, stop swimming against the current. The old cycle is comfortable because it's familiar. It doesn't require profound transformation, only repetition. Earn, spend, get frustrated, start over. The mind knows this path well, and that's why it seems safe, even when it leads nowhere. On the other side, crossing that threshold requires accepting an uncomfortable truth. The discomfort you feel is not a sign of error, but of transition. It's the natural friction between who you were financially and who you are beginning to become. This phase demands a different mindset, more conscious, less reactive. It requires decisions aligned with the long term, even when the short term provokes concern. It requires emotional maturity to avoid confusing momentary relief with real progress. And that's not easy, because it goes against everything we've been trained to seek. When you understand this, something changes in how you interpret your own tiredness. Discouragement ceases to be a warning to stop and becomes an indicator that you are getting out of autopilot. It's as if the journey is asking for a firmer stance, greater clarity about what you really want to build. At this point, saving ceases to be just about putting money aside and becomes an act of identity, a reflection of the decisions you choose to repeat, even when no one is watching. At this stage, the shark gate is no longer a distant metaphor. It becomes a clear psychological landmark. You realize that crossing it doesn't mean everything will be easy, but that the game changes. The rules become clearer. The impact of choices begins to appear. The journey ceases to be confusing and becomes intentional. Returning to the old cycle is still possible, but it no longer seems innocent. You know what you're doing when you choose to go back, and knowing that changes everything. This is the point where each person needs to decide which story they will continue telling themselves. The story that nothing works, or the story that some things only work after you get through the most uncomfortable part. This decision isn't announced. It isn't celebrated. It isn't visible to others, but it defines the entire course of the journey. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because there is something essential that sustains those who cross this threshold and prevents them from returning to the cycle, even when new temptations arise. Comment below. That makes sense to me. Or I'm on this journey too. And if you've made it this far, it's because this conversation touched on something real within you. Perhaps it wasn't comfortable at all times, but it made sense. So, if this kind of reflection helps you see money, decisions, and your own journey more clearly, consider subscribing to the channel. Not as a commitment, but as a way to stay connected to content that talks about building wealth without shortcuts, without empty promises, and with more honesty about the process. If you'd like, you can also leave a comment saying you made it to the end. You can write something simple like, "This message was for me," or "I'm with you until the end. I read these comments and they show that this exchange here is worthwhile, that this conversation isn't just one-sided. And if at any point you felt you connected with what was said, helps bring that video to other people who are exactly in that silent phase of their journey. It's a small gesture, but it greatly strengthens this type of content. Oh, and there's a video over here that perfectly complements everything we've just discussed. Click on it and continue with me there, because this journey still has important layers to be revealed.